Welcome to the Creepy Side of NEPA's Creepy Shorts. A selection of some of our most terrifying stories from past episodes. Now is the time to turn off the lights, if you dare. Turn up the volume and enjoy this hand-picked story from our tomb.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Creepy Side of NEPA's Creepy Shorts. I am Dan Kosloski. Here we are on April 5th, 2025. This date happens to be the 100th anniversary of the Broad Mountain Ghost in Schuylkill County. We talked about this legend back on episode number 58, titled The Creepy Side of NEPA, Legend of the Frackville Hex and the Broad Mountain Ghost. Our guest that evening was John Walsh, founder of HauntedAnthraciteTales.com. John shared with us a little bit of the background and story of the Broad Mountain Ghost. Here he is again with the story of the Broad Mountain Ghost that started back 100 years ago today.
Believe it or not, the most famous story in the county is the story of the Broad Mountain Ghost, commonly known as the Gordon Ghost.
Yep, I have heard of that one a little bit. I heard bits and pieces of the story, yep.
Yeah, that goes way back to 1925, and it's a long story, but I'll just kind of, give you a short synopsis of it. In a nutshell, what happened was in April of 1925, a couple, their names were the Duncans, they were up walking on Broad Mountain, and when they were walking, they found the body of a person. And what had happened was this person was kind of semi under a bush, but her body had been burned. So they alerted the authorities. The authorities came up, and they came to the conclusion that it was a young girl, probably in the age of about 16 to 20 years old. And the body was burned because whoever had committed the murder was trying to conceal the evidence. They were trying to get rid of it. They doused it with gasoline, set it ablaze. Sure enough, a rain cloud comes through and douses it and puts the flames out. So all that was left of the young woman was from her knees down and then her head, basically, and a little bit of her shoulder. So they start doing this investigation, and for approximately 7 years, they had a detective on the case, and they went all over the place trying to figure out who had killed this girl. They couldn't even identify who she was. They went as far as Boston to Detroit, out to Indiana, but they weren't able to figure out who the girl was. So when they first found the body, they decided they needed something so that people might be able to identify her. Well, you couldn't do fingerprints. There was nothing there. You couldn't do DNA. It wasn't even a thing at that point. Or teeth.
Yeah, back then they didn't have many options.
Right. So they opted to keep the head, and they actually took a container, filled it with formaldehyde, put the head in this large jar and sealed it. And the doctor that held on to the head, he's very infamous in this area. His name was Dr. Robert Spencer from Ashland. He actually had the head up until 1941. And that way, anyone that felt that they might know who the young lady was, they would come into his office. So he'd go back into a closet, open up the door, bring out the jar, set it down, and then they would view it, and never figured out who it was.
Yeah. This thing hold on to a head that long. Wow.
What happened was state police got word that Dr. Spencer stole the head, and one day they came knocking, and they said, we need the head. So the story is he supposedly made a mold of the face, but then he ended up handing the head over to the district attorney of the county, and that person handed over the staties. But, this went on for years, and we're actually nearing the 100th anniversary, and it's still a mystery. We have no idea who this young lady was. But I came upon an article that just blew me away. So the murder took place in 1925. And like we said, the head, just the feet, but the rest of the body was basically just ashes, just charred. Well, this claimed that there was a young lady by the name of Agatha Bullock. And within the article, it said that when the body was first found, her mother, whose name was Mamie, went and identified the young girl. And they were so convinced that it was indeed Agatha, they kept the head, but they gave her the ashes. And she actually brought the ashes back to her home in Frackville. And they buried the ashes of the girl somewhere within Frackville. In fact, there was actually a grave marker with the name Agatha Bullock. Now, the interesting thing about this was all other newspapers were saying that the identity was unknown. They went through a bunch of different young ladies they thought it was, and sure enough, it wasn't. But yet, the two articles that I found, the first one came out of Lancaster. So I thought, Lancaster, that's pretty far.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a mistake or something along those lines. Well, sure enough, while I continued doing my research, there was one from the Pottsville Republican, right down the road from us. It claimed that the remains were of this young girl. Well, the really intriguing thing is they had the remains in 1925. The article came out in 1930, 5 years later, because Agatha showed up at her house. She was alive the entire time. And she had actually been in kind of like a prostitution ring. And she came back to her house and she viewed the grave where supposedly her remains were.
Whoa.
Yeah. So the cool thing is, Dan, I knew what happened to the head, but I was asked a couple of times by people, well, what about the rest of the body? And I made the assumption that the rest of the body was basically just buried maybe in up behind the Schuylkill County Alms House. It was at Potter's Field. But yet this article is claiming I'm wrong. It was actually in Frackville. The remains are buried somewhere.
Wow. Imagine burying the body you think, and then they ended up at your front door.
How about it? And even with that, the claim was in the article that there was a gravestone that said her name on it, Agatha Bullock. Now, whether that gravestone is still there or if it existed or if it was on the family plot, I have no idea. I'm not even sure. I know the family moved away. And I know in my research, Agatha had a very long life, good life. She got married and had kids. But as for the remains, it sounds like odds are they're still within the borough of Frackville.
That is a wild story.
How about it? How about it? Out of all the things. And even with that, I've talked to people about doing reverse DNA analysis to try to find out who the girl was. The state police only have to hold on to evidence for 75 years. So for the head, whether they still have it or not, I have no idea. Odds are it's gone. To know that, the town that I grew up in may have the remains of that young lady. I've been hearing that story since I was a little kid. That just blew my mind.
Yeah, like I said, I heard bits and pieces of that story just floating around over the past few years, but nothing like that.
I mean, the actual ghost story aspect of it, they claim that the young girl, could still be experienced up there. And the ghost claims started right away, where people would hear moaning. They claim that they would see the young lady actually going through the forest. The most common claim is when you're going up the mountain, your car starts to sputter and starts to turn off. Some people have claimed you could see her running across the road. Of course, for more extreme purposes, they claim she's on fire, which, the other one is the car, if it turns off, you will continue going up the mountain. So some cool things.
Yeah,
Something
I heard there's
to,
a couple places in our area that happens.
Yeah, and it's definitely something to check out on a Saturday night, if you have nothing else going on. But it got to the point there were so many people that were going up the mountain, in a couple of years after the murder, that the police had to come in and shut it down because, you would have dozens and dozens of cars. It was impeding everyone's progress. But at the same token, they would go there and for self-protection, they would take guns, and sure enough, shots would be fired. So the cops came in and actually kind of shoot everyone away.
Yeah, I can understand that, especially if they're bringing guns.
Yeah, it's a smart move. But it's quite a story, and it's a very well-known story. I think everybody that lives in the area down here, they've always gone across Gorda Mountain and told the story. So.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Creepy Side of NEPA's Creepy Shorts. If you would like to hear more stories from John Walsh on the Haunted Anthracite Tales, you can visit his website, hauntedanthracitetales.com. Please be sure to follow the Creepy Side of NEPA on Facebook and YouTube. They are the best ways to always be informed on the latest show information. And as always, if you have a story you would like to share on the Creepy Side of NEPA, email us. Our email address is ghost@WNEP.com. Thank you for listening tonight. And until next time, enjoy the Creepy Side of NEPA.
This has been the Creepy Side of NEPA. If you have a spooky story that took place in northeastern or central Pennsylvania, send it to ghost@WNEP.com. for your chance to share it on an upcoming episode. We're dying to hear from you.